Hi, this is Dr. Nick. I'm the Incrementalist here with incremental insights for a better business and a better life. So today I wanted to talk about the publication of a study that came up. It's a pre-published study, so it's not been peer-reviewed. It's in one of the pre-publication servers that are available that you can look at. It's there for discussion. And it talks about blood groups and the change in incidence and severity of COVID-19 in people with different blood groups. So what did they show, or what were their findings? In summary, essentially, it seemed to be that if you had an A blood group, you were more likely to both suffer from the disease and potentially suffer worst instances or worst clinical outcomes and disease progress. If you had O, blood group O, then you were less likely to, so the complete opposite. So what does this mean? And should suddenly all the A blood group people in the world start worrying? Well, first of all, no. It's a pre-published study. It is designed to look at information that came out. In fact, there were two other studies, one from China and one came from the US, that looked at blood group and blood group instances. At least in the US study, there seemed also to be an association with a decrease in incidence in AB blood group. That's harder to be certain of because there's fewer people in that blood grouping, and perhaps an increase in the B blood group. But let's put all of this in perspective. So first of all, that study was a genetic marker study. So they were looking at the loci of genetic information that drives some of the ABO blood grouping system. And to be clear, whilst we're pretty good about blood groups and what we understand about that, our understanding continues to evolve just about blood groups. This isn't even COVID-19. What we've learned over the course of time is that it's probably not quite that simple, although we can simplify it for the purposes of transfusions and blood donors and so forth, because those broad categories do work in terms of immune response when we transfuse people. But there's much more complexity to some of these blood groups. There's even some pretty rare types of blood groups that we find. Secondly, this was the genomes that are associated. This is not a one-to-one relationship, and it was an association with the genetic markers for each of those blood groups. That's all interesting because it gives us some reason to understand the observational studies that were put out from China and from the US. But equally, what it doesn't tell us is, gosh, you have a blood group O, therefore you're not at risk. It's not like that. And in fact, what it's the best analogy I can give you is if you've done any of the genome typing, family tracing and so forth, and they sometimes send you additional medical information. And a lot of that's been locked down. But what we might have received, or you might have received, was your genome tells you that you're more likely to get Alzheimer's. Well, that may well be true, and certainly your genome says that. But how that actually manifests is widely varied, depending on each of the instances that we see of the gene expression. And in fact, importantly, it's just statistics. So in this case, it means that there's an increased likelihood. What that number is and what that means, much harder to determine, especially at this point because we don't have all of the data. So it's important to take this in the context of, if you have the A blood group, then potentially you're at slightly more risk. We don't know what that increased risk is, but it gives us another marker. And I think what's interesting about the gene loci is that they also looked at the ACE inhibitor, the angiotensin converting enzyme, or ACE2, which has been a subject of a lot of focus because we seem to see that this is also linked, and the spikes that you see in that picture of the coronavirus that everybody's familiar with actually fit into that ACE inhibitor. It's one that's associated with blood pressure. If you're on an ACE inhibitor for treatment of blood pressure, there was a question whether you should, you shouldn't. I think that's still not determined, but it's a receptor that the virus plugs into, and it's found in lots of different places, particularly in the lungs, which explains why the drug manifests, or the virus manifests itself in the lungs. It's found in other places in the body, it's more of our understanding, and potentially might serve as a means of treatment or blocking the disease as we understand more of the details. As with all things, it's complicated. So the lasting message I have for you is, this is not a time to say, gosh, I've got this blood group, therefore it's great, or it's not good news. It's neither of those. It's just additional information that we're using in the healthcare and the groups of the medical researchers to understand more, and then to help us develop treatments. Hopefully you'll find that useful. As we explore more of this, we'll talk about some of the clinical details, and certainly be including that in upcoming updates. And obviously from a business perspective, as you think about what that means from opening and reopening, lots of complexity, not just because of the medical aspect, but because of the details and the fast-moving nature of this. It's important to get the right advice. Please feel free to reach out. I'm Dr. Nick. I'm the Incrementalist, here with healthy insights for a better business and better life.